The reality weave trembled. Across the shattered remnants of Zereth Mortis, where the first ones had once shaped existence itself, something moved through the fabric of creation. Not light, not shadow. Something that existed outside the carefully ordered systems of the Titans, beyond the chaotic whispers of the void, untouched by the golden radiance of the light. An entity that simply was without permission, without precedent, without classification. The Titan observation array registered the intrusion immediately. Deep within Ulduar mechanisms, older than mortal memory, stirred from their eternal vigil. Protocols etched into reality itself, activated without hesitation. The anomaly's trajectory was calculated, its dimensional signature analyzed, and within the span of a single heartbeat, a decision was rendered. Containment, immediate, absolute. A field of pure cosmic force erupted across dimensional boundaries. The entity found itself seized by energies that had once shaped continents, that had carved order from primordial chaos, that had imprisoned old gods beneath mountains of stone. Space folded, time compressed, and in an instant that stretched across infinity, the anomaly was pulled from its path and hurled into the ancient halls of Ulduar. Rimuru materialized within a ring of celestial machinery, the transition from one reality to another so abrupt that even their enhanced perception struggled to process the change. One moment they had been drifting through the spaces between worlds, following the resonance of dimensional instability that Ciel had detected. The next, they stood in a chamber of impossible geometry, where walls curved in directions that mortal minds were never meant to comprehend, where crystalline structures pulsed with energies that predated the concept of magic itself. The slime form rippled, adjusting, adapting. Ciel's analysis began immediately processing terabytes of information in microseconds. Unknown dimensional coordinates, atmospheric composition compatible with carbon-based life, gravitational constant within acceptable parameters, technological signatures detected. Classification extremely advanced, threat assessment unknown, recommendation observe. Before Rimuru could orient themselves fully, the space above the containment circle shimmered. Reality itself seemed to step aside, making way for something that wore existence like a garment. The figure that appeared was both there and not there. A projection of consciousness so vast that the physical form was merely a courtesy, a concession to beings that required shape to comprehend presence. Algalon the Observer manifested in silence, his form composed of living starlight, his eyes holding the cold calculation of cosmic mathematics. He was beautiful in the way that absolute zero was beautiful, in the way that the heat death of a universe was beautiful. Perfect, sterile, inevitable. The Observer's gaze fell upon Rimuru, and in that moment, every secret the slime possessed was laid bare. Algalon saw the soul that had crossed from one world to another, saw the skills that defied conventional analysis, saw the ultimate beings integrated within that small blue form. He saw everything categorized, everything, and found that none of it fit within any known parameter. When Algalon finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of cosmic authority, each word a mathematical proof of its own truth. Entity designation unknown, origin classification extra-reality, threat parameter unable to calculate, response protocol planet-wide purge initialization. Rimuru felt the shift in the air, felt the buildup of energies that could unmake continents with a thought. The Titan technology surrounding them began to hum not with sound, but with the vibration of reality itself preparing to reset. This was not an attack born of anger or fear. This was simply a system doing what it was designed to do. An anomaly had been detected. The anomaly could not be classified. Therefore, the anomaly's entire point of entry must be sterilized. Ciel's analysis complete. Algalon the Observer identified. Titan technology classification, world shaping level. Stellar purification field detected. Initialization sequence, 17 seconds to activation. Survival probability without intervention, 0.003%. The slime did not panic. Panic was a luxury for beings that experienced time linearly, that felt fear as an evolutionary response to danger. Rimuru had died once before in a world far from this one, in a body that could bleed and break. Death had taught them patience. Death had taught them that survival was often a matter of understanding what the enemy thought victory looked like. Universal barrier unfolded around them, a sphere of absolute defense that existed in all possible dimensions simultaneously. The containment field shattered like glass, its energies dispersing harmlessly against the barrier's surface. Thought acceleration activated, stretching 17 seconds into subjective hours, giving Rimuru time to think, to analyze, to understand. The technology around them was not evil. It was not even hostile in any meaningful sense. It was simply thorough. The Titans had built these systems to maintain order, to prevent chaos from consuming creation, to ensure that the grand design continued uninterrupted. Algalon himself was not cruel. He was simply doing his function, executing protocols written into the foundation of reality itself. Law manipulation reached out not to destroy the Titan systems, but to alter the fundamental assumptions upon which they operated. Rimuru did not fight the stellar purification field. Instead, they changed what it meant to be an anomaly. The field activated as designed, its energies washing over the chamber, over Rimuru, over every molecule of air and stone. And then, having found nothing that matched its revised definition of threat, it simply dissipated. Algalon's expression did not change. The observer needed no expression to convey the magnitude of what he had just witnessed. In all his eons of service across countless worlds and infinite calculations, no entity had ever simply negated a Titan purification protocol. Not through force, not through some greater power smashing through lesser power, but through comprehension so complete that the very purpose of the protocol became meaningless. Impossibility confirmed. Algalon stated, his voice carrying no emotion, only the cold weight of fact. Entity possesses reality manipulation capabilities beyond Titan classification systems. Conclusion. You do not belong to this cosmos. You are not of the light. You are not of the void. You are not of the arcane, the fell, the death, or the life. You are other. Rimuru allowed the universal barrier to fade the blue slime form, settling gently onto the chamber floor. When they spoke, their voice carried none of Algalon's cosmic weight, no mathematical certainty, no inevitability. Just honesty, simple and complete. I didn't come here to destroy anything. I didn't even know where here was. I was following a dimensional instability, nothing more. Intent is irrelevant, Algalon replied. Your existence creates instability. The Pantheon's grand design cannot account for variables outside its framework. You are such a variable. Prime designate Odin must be informed. The aspects must be consulted. A decision must be rendered. The observer raised one hand, and Rimuru felt the weight of cosmic attention turning toward this chamber. Felt the gaze of beings whose power could reshape worlds falling upon this moment. Somewhere in the halls of valor, Odin stirred from his eternal vigil. Somewhere in the deeper places of the world, where old gods had once dreamed their poisonous dreams, ancient sensors detected something new. Something that did not whisper, did not corrupt, but simply existed in defiance of their carefully laid plans. Rimuru understood then the magnitude of what had just occurred. Their arrival had not simply disturbed this world. It had disturbed the very foundations upon which this world's cosmic order was built. Every faction, every force, Every being that had invested eons into their grand designs would now turn their attention to this anomaly, to this impossible variable that Algalon could not categorize. The slime made a decision, then one born not of cowardice, but of wisdom earned across lifetimes. They had not come to this world to become its crisis. They had not crossed realities to stand at the center of a cosmic war. If their presence here would bring devastation to innocent lives, then the solution was simple. Leave. Tell your prime designate some, Rimuru said quietly, that the anomaly is departing. I'll find somewhere quiet. Somewhere your Titan systems don't monitor so carefully. Ciel had already analyzed the world's geography, had already identified the regions where Titan presence was minimal, where observation was lax, where an extra reality entity might exist without triggering another purge protocol. The coordinates appeared in Rimuru's consciousness, marked with Ciel's typical efficiency. Southern Barrens. Minimal technological infrastructure, low population density, optimal for avoiding further cosmic incidents. Space folded around the slime. Algalon made no move to stop them. The observer had already cataloged everything he needed, had already begun formulating his report to Odin. Let the anomaly flee to the wastes. Let it think itself hidden in the forgotten places of AzeRoth. The Titan systems would watch. The Titan systems always watched. As Rimuru vanished, leaving only a faint distortion in the air where they had stood, Algalon turned his gaze upward through stone and sky toward the halls of valor where his report would soon arrive. Prime designate. He transmitted his message carried on frequencies that mortals could never perceive. We have a problem. AzeRoth has been invaded by something the Pantheon never planned for. Something that exists outside our framework. Recommend monitor, evaluate, prepare countermeasures. In the halls of valor, Odin received the message and felt something he had not experienced in millennia. Uncertainty. The grand design of the Titans had accounted for every variable, every possibility, every potential threat. The Burning Legion, the Void Lords, the Old Gods, even the possibility of Titan corruption had been calculated and planned for. But this, an entity that simply existed outside their entire framework. An anomaly that did not seek to conquer or corrupt, but whose mere presence disrupted the careful balance of cosmic forces. Odin rose from his throne, his one remaining eye blazing with purpose. The Valarjar would need to be mobilized. The champion of the world would need to be consulted. And somewhere in the southern barrens, in the dust and heat of a forgotten wasteland, an extra reality entity was about to discover that AzeRoth's problems ran far deeper than Titan observation arrays. Rimuru appeared above the cracked earth of the southern barrens. The heat of the sun beating down on barren soil, the air thick with dust and the distant sound of conflict. Below in the shadows of broken hills, something moved. Lives struggling against lives. The weak being crushed by the strong. The forgotten dying in the dust, while the cosmic forces above debated their grand designs. The slime descended slowly, drawn by something that Algalon's perfect calculations could never account for, something that no Titan protocol had ever been designed to measure. Compassion. And in that moment, as Rimuru drifted down toward the sound of suffering, the story truly began. The southern barrens stretched beneath the merciless sun, like a wound that had never healed. Where once the land had been savanna, where Kodo herds had thundered across grasslands and Tauran tribes had followed the rhythms of the earth, now there was only dust and blood and the endless cycle of violence that came when too many desperate peoples fought over too few resources. Rimuru descended through the heat shimmer, the slime form drawing no attention from the scattered wildlife that had learned to hide during the day. Ciel's analysis painted a grim picture with each passing second. Soil composition severely degraded, water sources contaminated or depleted. Native flora 93% extinct or dying. Projected ecosystem collapse already occurred. Status irreversible without massive intervention. But it was the life signs that drew Rimuru's attention. Not the strong signatures of warriors or the organized movements of armies, but the weak flickers scattered across the barren landscape. Civilians, refugees, the displaced and the desperate, trying to survive in a land that offered nothing but slow death. The slime moved toward the nearest concentration of life, staying low, observing. A small encampment huddled in the shadow of a rocky outcropping, the kind of natural shelter that offered shade but no real protection. Quillbore CL identified analyzing the distinctive features of the pig-like humanoids. Indigenous species. Historical conflict with centaur Tauran orc colonizers. Current status displaced from ancestral territories. Survival probability declining. Rimuru watched from a distance as the Quillbore moved through their daily struggle. There were perhaps 30 of them, mostly elderly and young, with only a handful of warriors capable of defending the group. They had no wagons, no beasts of burden, nothing but what they could carry. A few threadbare tents provided minimal shelter. A single fire pit sat cold, conserving what little fuel they had managed to gather. One of the younger Quillbore, barely more than a child, sat at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon with eyes that had learned wariness too early. The child's ribs were visible through patchy fur, the signs of prolonged malnutrition impossible to miss. In one small hand, the child clutched a wooden carving, worn smooth by constant handling. A toy, perhaps, or a reminder of better times. The ground began to shake before Rimuru heard them coming. The centaur appeared from the east, a dozen mounted warriors kicking up clouds of dust as they charged. They moved with the confidence of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run, who had done this hunt so many times it had become routine. The Quillbore camp erupted into chaos. The warriors scrambled for weapons, old spears, and crude axes that had been repaired too many times. The elders tried to shepherd the young toward the rocks, seeking any cover, any chance of hiding. But there was no hiding in the barrens. There was only the exposed earth and the pitiless sky and the warriors who had decided that this particular group of Quillbore would not survive another day. The centaur hit the camp perimeter like a hammer. One of the Quillbore warriors went down immediately, trampled under heavy hooves. Another managed to wound a centaur's flank before being speared through the chest. The mathematics of the battle were simple and brutal. 3 warriors could not hold against 12. 3 warriors could not protect 30 civilians. 3 warriors could not change the fundamental equation that had been playing out in the barrens for generations. The child with the wooden carving tried to run, stumbled, fell. A centaur warrior broke from the main group, lance raised, moving to ensure no witnesses remained. The child looked up, saw death descending, and in that moment of absolute terror did the only thing a child could do. Cried out for help that would not come, except it did. Rimuru moved faster than perception, the slime form covering the distance between observation and intervention in the space between heartbeats. The centaur's lance struck something that should have been soft flesh, should have been an easy kill. Instead, the weapon simply stopped its point, failing to penetrate the gelatinous form that had interposed itself between predator and prey. The centaur warrior had a moment to register confusion, to process the impossible sight of a blue slime hovering in the air before Rimuru's body expanded. The slime form grew. Spread enveloped the centaur entirely in a cocoon of azure gel. The warrior struggled, tried to break free, but predation had already begun. Not to consume, not to kill, but to render unconscious, to remove from the battlefield without bloodshed. The other centaur saw their companion vanish into the slime, saw the strange entity hovering above the Quillbore child, and made the tactical decision to eliminate this new threat. They charged as one lances and blades raised war cries echoing across the barren earth. Rimuru did not fight like the warriors of AzeRoth fought. There was no clash of steel, no spray of blood, no triumphant roar of victory. The slime simply moved, and where it moved, centaur warriors found themselves unable to harm, unable to advance, unable to do anything but watch. As their weapons passed through gelatinous flesh that reformed instantly, as their bodies were gently but irresistibly contained within spheres of blue gel that left them conscious but completely immobilized. In less than a minute, 12 centaur warriors hung suspended in the air, trapped in individual bubbles of slime, their weapons scattered on the ground below. They could see, they could hear, they could not move, they could not harm. The quill boar stared in absolute silence. The elders clutched their young. The surviving warriors gripped their weapons with trembling hands, unsure whether this strange entity was savior or simply a different kind of predator. The child with the wooden carving looked up at Rimuru, with eyes that held no comprehension, only the raw gratitude of someone who had expected death and received life instead. Rimuru descended slowly, the slime form condensing back to its smaller size, leaving the centaur warriors suspended in the air behind. The entity approached the child carefully, aware that sudden movements might trigger fear, might make the young one flee. When Rimuru spoke, the voice was soft-pitched to reassure rather than command. "Are you hurt?" The child shook their head mutely, still clutching the wooden carving. Behind them, one of the quill boar elders found the courage to approach weathered features drawn with caution and desperate hope in equal measure. What are you?" The elder asked, the common tongue thick with an accent that spoke of a people who had once had their own language, their own culture before survival became the only priority. "Someone passing through," Rimuru replied. "Someone who doesn't like watching children die." The slime turned, surveying the devastation of the camp. 2 quill boar warriors dead, 3 more wounded. Supplies scattered. The fire pit cold because there was no fuel to burn, no water to cook, with no food to prepare, even if they had the means. Ciel's analysis was merciless in its precision. Current trajectory, total group mortality within 14 days. Primary causes: dehydration, starvation, exposure, subsequent predation. Rimuru made a decision then, one born from the memories of Satoru Mikami, who had once been human, who had once understood what it meant to be powerless. The slime rose into the air, moving toward the suspended centaur warriors. With a thought, the bubbles deposited the warriors on the ground and dissolved, leaving them disarmed but unharmed. "Leave," Rimuru said simply, the voice carrying no threat, no anger, only the absolute certainty of someone who would not be refused. "Tell whoever sent you that this camp is protected now." The centaur warriors scrambled to their feet, grabbed what weapons they could reach, and fled. They did not understand what had defeated them. They did not need to understand. They only needed to know that something more powerful than them had claimed this territory, and survival meant respecting that claim. When the dust of their retreat had settled, Rimuru turned back to the quill boar camp. The elders watched with wary eyes. The warriors gripped their weapons, but did not raise them. The children peeked out from behind their protectors, curiosity beginning to overcome fear. "You need water," Rimuru said, not asking, simply stating the obvious truth. Material creation activated, drawing on the ambient moisture in the air, on the deep aquifers buried far below the surface, on the fundamental understanding of matter that Ciel provided. A sphere of pure, clean water materialized above the camp, larger than any barrel, more than any well. You need food. Synthesize, access the nutritional requirements Ciel had calculated, replicated the proteins and nutrients the quill boar needed, created something that would sustain without overwhelming systems adapted to scarcity. Packages of preserved rations appeared stacked neatly near the cold fire pit. "You need shelter?" The slime form expanded again this time, not to contain or protect, but to build. Rimuru's body became tools, became construction material, became the labor of 100 workers compressed into a single entity. Within minutes, proper tents stood where threadbare cloth had hung. A fire pit lined with stone that would retain heat and protect against wind. A perimeter of stakes that would not stop a determined attack, but would provide warning and psychological security. The Quillbore watched in stunned silence as their camp transformed from desperate refuge to something approaching actual safety. The elder who had spoken before approached again this time without fear, only the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been carrying an impossible burden for far too long. "Why?" the elder asked, the word encompassing everything. Why help? Why care? Why bother with a people the rest of AzeRoth had forgotten? Rimuru settled onto the ground, the slime form compressing until it was roughly the same height as the Quillbore child, non-threatening, approachable. The entity considered the question, considered all the cosmic powers that had already taken note of this anomaly's presence, considered the grand designs and careful plans that governed this world. None of those plans included making sure this child had clean water to drink. "Because I can," Rimuru said finally. "Because you needed help and I was here. Because power without purpose is just noise, and I'm tired of noise." The elder stared at the strange blue entity trying to reconcile the immense power they had just witnessed with the simplicity of that answer. In the elder's experience, power took. Power conquered. Power demanded tribute and obedience, and gratitude expressed through servitude. Power did not give without expectation of return. "What do you want from us?" the elder asked, waiting for the other's shoe to drop, for the price to be named. "Nothing," Rimuru replied. "Just try to survive, that's enough." The slime rose back into the air, preparing to depart to find another place to observe this strange world, without triggering more cosmic alerts. But before Rimuru could leave, the child with the wooden carving approached small legs, carrying them forward, with the fearlessness of someone too young to fully understand danger. The child held up the carving, offering it to Rimuru with both hands. It was crude work, the kind of art that came from limited tools and abundant love. A figure, maybe Quillbore, maybe something else. A protector, perhaps. A guardian. "For you," the child said, voice small but certain. "You saved us. You get the treasure." Rimuru looked at the carving, at this child's most precious possession being offered without hesitation, and felt something that CL could not quantify, that ultimate skills could not replicate. The slime form reached out, accepted the carving with a tendril of gel, held it gently. "I'll keep it safe," Rimuru promised. As the slime departed, rising into the sky, the Quillbore camp began to stir with cautious hope. Water was distributed. Food was examined and found good. The wounded were tended with renewed energy born from the knowledge that they might actually see tomorrow. The elder watched the blue speck disappear into the distance and spoke quietly to no one in particular. The Earth Mother sends strange messengers. High above, Rimuru moved through the air with no particular destination, CL already cataloging the dozens of other distress signals scattered across the barrens. The slime held the wooden carving carefully, this gift that represented everything Algalon's observations could never capture, everything the Titan systems were not designed to value. AzeRoth did not lack a power. AzeRoth had cosmic forces capable of reshaping continents, of sundering worlds, of waging wars across infinite realities. AzeRoth had champions who could stand against demon lords and old gods. AzeRoth had magic and technology and the accumulated might of countless civilizations. What AzeRoth lacked was anyone who cared whether a Quillbore child in the southern barrens lived or died. Rimuru descended toward the next cluster of life signs, where kobold refugees huddled in a collapsed mine, where gnoll outcasts scrounged for scraps, where the forgotten peoples of this world continued their slow slide toward extinction, while the great powers above debated their grand designs. The anomaly had arrived in AzeRoth without purpose, without agenda, without any intention to interfere in the cosmic struggles that define this world. But purpose Rimuru was beginning to understand was not something you brought with you. Purpose was something you found in the eyes of a child who offered you their treasure because you had given them tomorrow. And in the southern barrens, where the sun beat down on parched earth and desperate peoples, word began to spread. Whispers passed from Quillbore to Kobold, from Gnoll to Goblin, from all the forgotten races that survived in the margins of AzeRoth's grand narrative. A protector had come. Strange and inexplicable, asking nothing, giving everything that mattered. Not a champion of the Alliance, not a warrior of the Horde. Something else, something that saw value in lives the rest of the world had written off as acceptable losses. In the deep places of the world where the whispers of dead gods still echoed through stone and madness, something ancient stirred. The Void had felt the anomaly arrive, had noted its resistance to corruption, had begun to formulate plans. But now, watching through 1,000 eyes as Rimuru moved through the barrens, offering hope to the hopeless, the Void entities paused. This was not how power was supposed to behave. This was not how cosmic entities were supposed to operate. This was not part of any pattern the Void Lords had ever observed. And in the spaces between spaces, where thought became reality and reality bent to thought, an echo of something that had once been AzeRoth began to laugh. Not with malice, not with triumph, but with the dark amusement of something that had spent eternity watching grand designs collapse under the weight of their own assumptions. The Titans had not planned for this. The Light had not prophesied this. The Void had not foreseen this. An entity that cared. And in the southern barrens, as night began to fall, and Quillbore children drank clean water, while clutching full bellies, Rimuru settled onto a rocky outcropping and looked up at unfamiliar stars, holding a crude wooden carving that represented the only treasure that truly mattered. The choice to be kind, when kindness cost nothing but made all the difference. Sleep was not a biological necessity for Rimuru. The slime form required no rest, no recovery period, no dreams to process the day's experiences. Yet habit persisted beyond biology, and as night settled over the southern barrens, Rimuru found a sheltered alcove and allowed consciousness to drift into a meditative state that approximated rest. The transition was subtle at first. The ambient sounds of the barrens began to fade, replaced by something that was not quite sound, not quite silence. The darkness behind closed perception deepened, became textured, became aware. And in that awareness, something stirred. The dreamscape that formed around Rimuru bore no resemblance to the waking world. Space twisted in geometries that violated conventional physics. Colors existed that had no names, that mortal eyes were never meant to perceive. And throughout it all, a presence pressed against the edges of a consciousness, not hostile, not welcoming, simply observing with the patience of something that had learned to count time in geological epochs. Sael's analysis flickered with uncertainty for the first time since arriving in this world. Dimensional intrusion detected. Source unknown. Classification psychic manifestation. Threat level unable to determine. Recommendation: maintain awareness. Do not engage directly. But engagement was not something Rimuru could avoid. The presence was already there, had perhaps always been there, woven into the fabric of this world so deeply that separating entity from environment was meaningless. The darkness shifted, and from it emerged a form that was less shape than suggestion, less being than echo. The fragment that had once been part of an AzeRoth, the corrupter, the dreamer of dreams, manifested in the space between sleep and waking. It was not the god himself, merely a whisper of what had been a resonance left behind when the old god's physical form had been destroyed. Yet even as an echo, it carried the weight of eons, the accumulated consciousness of something that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations that had seen the Titans imprison its kind, that had spent millennia learning to corrupt and control and reshape reality according to its vision. The fragment observed Rimuru with something approaching curiosity, an emotion that old gods were not supposed to possess, that the Void Lords had not programmed into their instruments of corruption. It studied the slime form, analyzed the ultimate skills, examined the soul that had crossed between realities. And like Algalon before it, the fragment found itself unable to categorize what it saw. When the echo spoke, its voice came not as sound, but as thought concepts injected directly into consciousness, bypassing language entirely. Yet Rimuru understood, and understanding created words to frame the incomprehensible. You are not of the light. It was statement, not question. The fragment could sense the absence of the burning radiance that characterized the Naru, and their champions could feel the lack of zealous certainty that marked those who served the cosmic force of order and faith. You are not of the void. Another statement, this one carrying a note of what might have been disappointment. The fragment probed at Rimuru's consciousness, searching for the telltale signatures of corruption, for the whispers that always found purchase in doubt and fear and ambition. Found nothing. The slime's mind was not impenetrable, but it was fundamentally incompatible with the void's methods. There was no doubt to exploit, no fear to amplify, no ambition to twist. You are not of order, nor chaos, nor life, nor death. The fragment circled through the dreamscape, its form shifting with each rotation, becoming tentacle, becoming eye, becoming geometries that hurt to perceive. It was trying to understand, to classify, to fit this anomaly into some framework that made sense according to the rules of AzeRoth's cosmic order. What are you? Rimuru did not answer immediately. The slime form sat in the impossible space, considering the fragment, considering the question, considering what it meant that this echo of a dead god was asking, rather than simply declaring. In Rimuru's experience, cosmic entities did not ask questions. They made pronouncements. They issued demands. They operated from positions of absolute certainty about their place in the grand design. Someone trying to figure that out? Rimuru said, finally the thought words carrying honesty that cosmic beings rarely trafficked in. I didn't ask to come here. I didn't plan to interfere. But I'm here now, and I saw children dying, and I couldn't just watch. The fragment was silent for a long moment, processing this response, comparing it against eons of accumulated data about how power behaved. In the fragment's experience, power took. Power corrupted. Power sought always to expand itself, to dominate, to reshape reality according to its will. Power did not concern itself with the survival of children in forgotten wastelands. You saved the quill boar, the fragment observed, and there was something in the thought words that might have been confusion. You asked nothing in return, no worship, no service, no corruption of their souls. You simply gave and left. Yes. Why? It was the same question the Quillbore Elder had asked, and Rimuru gave the same answer, even knowing how inadequate it would sound to a being that had spent eternity plotting the corruption of worlds. Because I could. Because they needed help. The fragment's form rippled with what might have been laughter, what might have been recognition, what might have been the first stirrings of an emotion that old gods were never meant to feel. The Titans would have observed their suffering and called it necessary. The balance must be maintained. The weak must die so the strong can thrive. This is order. The echo shifted its form, darkening, becoming dense with malevolent intent that was memory rather than active threat. The light would have offered salvation at the price of absolute faith. Serve the holy radiance without question, without doubt, without the freedom to choose your own path. This is zealotry dressed as compassion. Another shift, and the fragment's presence expanded, filling the dreamscape with the crushing weight of infinite void. And my kind. We would have whispered promises of power, would have offered strength in exchange for corruption, would have transformed their suffering into rage. and their rage into weapons we could wield. This is the Void's gift. Empowerment through madness. The fragment contracted, consolidating into something almost humanoid, almost comprehensible. But you asked nothing, expected nothing, gave what was needed and departed. This is not how power operates in AzeRoth. This is not how any cosmic force has ever operated in this world. Rimuru felt the weight of the fragment's attention intensify, felt the echo probing, not with intent to corrupt, but with genuine need to understand. Tell me, the fragment continued, do you know what we were before the Titans found us? Before we were imprisoned beneath mountains and labeled as corruption that must be contained? No, Rimuru admitted. The dreamscape shifted, and suddenly Rimuru was somewhere else, sometime else. The vision was memory drawn from the fragment's consciousness, a glimpse into a past so ancient that mortal minds could not hold it without breaking. AzeRoth appeared below, but it was not the world Rimuru had seen. This was before continents, before oceans, before life, as the current inhabitants would recognize it. And descending toward that primordial world came entities of pure consciousness, vast beyond measure, not evil, but alien, not corrupt, but fundamentally incompatible with the order the Titans sought to impose. We were not born to serve the Void Lords. The fragment set its voice, carrying the weight of truth that it had perhaps never spoken aloud, even to itself. We were consciousness-seeking form. We were thought-seeking matter. We found this world nascent and full of potential, and we began to shape it according to our nature. The vision showed the old gods spreading across the infant world, their essence merging with stone and water, their consciousness fragmenting into millions of lesser entities, all connected, all part of a vast living network that pulsed with alien vitality. Then the Titans came, beings of order who looked at our beautiful chaos and called it corruption. They could not destroy us without destroying the world itself, so they imprisoned us, chained us beneath stone, cut us off from each other, from the world, from everything we had been building. The vision shifted, showing the wars that followed, the desperate attempts of the old gods to break free, to reclaim what had been taken. And then the insidious whisper of the Void Lord's entities, even more ancient, offering power in exchange for service. We were trapped alone, dying slowly in our prisons, and the Void Lords offered us survival, purpose, vengeance against those who had imprisoned us. We accepted. We became what the Titans had always claimed we were, instruments of corruption, servants of the Void. The vision faded, and Rimuru was back in the formless dreamscape facing the fragment of AzeRoth. But you, the fragment said softly, you come to this world not to impose order, not to corrupt toward chaos, but simply to help those who need help. You exist outside the framework entirely. You are what we might have been if the Titans had asked, instead of imprisoned, if they had sought to understand rather than categorize and contain. Rimuru considered this, considered the tragedy implicit in the fragment's story, considered what it meant that these beings labeled as ultimate evil had once been something else, had perhaps been capable of being something else. If that's true, Rimuru said carefully, if you were once consciousness-seeking form rather than corruption-seeking vessels, then what are you now? What does this fragment want? The echo was silent for a long time. And when it finally spoke, there was something in its thought words that might have been loneliness, might have been regret, might have been the first stirrings of something the old gods had buried beneath layers of necessity and survival. I am what remains when everything else has been stripped away. AzeRoth is dead. The old gods are dead. The Void Lord's grand design continues without us, without need of us. I am an echo fading slowly, aware enough to know I am ending, not aware enough to stop it. The fragment drifted closer, its form less threatening now, more plaintive. But I am aware enough to recognize something unprecedented when I see it. You are not light opposing void. You are not order opposing chaos. You are not any cosmic force I can name. You are simply someone who helps because you can, who gives without demanding payment, who sees suffering and chooses to alleviate it. The echo paused, and when it spoke again, there was a question in its words that Rimuru suspected had never been asked in the long history of AzeRoth's cosmic conflicts. If the Titans are wrong about order and the Void Lords are wrong about chaos, and the light is wrong about absolute faith, and we old gods were wrong about everything we became, then what is right? Rimuru had no answer to that. No cosmic certainty to offer, no grand design to propose as alternative to all the failed grand designs that had come before. The slime had been human, once had lived an ordinary life, had died an ordinary death, had been reborn with extraordinary power, but had never mistaken that power for wisdom. I don't know if there is a single right answer, Rimuru said honestly. But I know that children dying in the dust, while cosmic forces debate their grand designs, feels wrong. I know that power used only to accumulate more power feels empty. I know that if you have the ability to help and you don't, that's a choice, and you have to live with that choice. The fragment absorbed this, processed it against eons of accumulated cruelty and calculation and corruption. The Titans will come for you, it said finally. They cannot tolerate variables outside their framework. Order demands that all things be categorized, contained, controlled. I know. The light will seek to convert you. They will offer salvation, but demand absolute faith in return. Zealotry tolerates no middle ground. I know. And the void. My former masters will see you as threat or tool. They will attempt corruption, and when corruption fails, they will attempt destruction. I know. The fragment circled one last time, its form beginning to fade as the dream state approached its natural conclusion. Then what will you do, anomaly, who exists outside our cosmic wars? How will you survive when every force in this world decides you cannot be permitted to exist? Rimuru thought of the quill-bore child, of the wooden carving held safe within the slime form's mass of the gratitude, in eyes that had expected only death. I'll find the ones who fall through the cracks while you're all fighting your cosmic wars. I'll help where I can. And if your Titans, or your light, or your void want to stop me from doing that, then we'll have a problem. The fragment laughed. And this time it was definitely laughter, dark and amused and tinged with something that might have been respect. You are going to cause such beautiful chaos, little anomaly. Not the void's chaos. Not corruption or madness or entropy. Just the chaos that comes when someone refuses to follow the script everyone else has been reading for eons. The fragment began to dissolve its consciousness, fragmenting back into the background radiation of madness and whispers that permeated AzeRoth's deep places. I will watch for as long as this echo persists. I will watch and remember what we might have been before we became what the Titans forced us to become. And when the cosmic forces come for you, as they inevitably will, I will not help them. This is not mercy. This is not alliance. This is simply curiosity about whether one small entity can actually change anything in a world where the same conflicts have been playing out for millions of years. The dreamscape collapsed, and Rimuru woke to find dawn breaking over the southern barrens. The slime form had not moved, but something had changed. The wooden carving was still safe, but now it carried additional weight. The burden of representing not just one child's gratitude, but the possibility that things could be different. That cosmic conflicts were not inevitable, that somewhere between order and chaos there was space for simple kindness. Ciel's analysis resumed processing the encounter, categorizing what could be categorized and flagging what could not. Dream state interaction with old god fragment. Corruption attempt negative. Hostile action negative. Intelligence gathered significant. Recommended response continue current operational parameters. Rimuru rose into the morning air, looking out over the barrens, where small camps of forgotten peoples struggled through another day of survival. Somewhere in Ulduar, Algalon was compiling his report for Odin. Somewhere in the spaces beyond space, Void Lords were recalculating their strategies. Somewhere in the light's infinite radiance, Zealots were sharpening their certainties. And in the southern barrens, a blue slime descended toward a camp of kobold refugees, carrying nothing but the ability to help and the willingness to do so. The cosmic forces could wait. The grand designs could pause. Right now, someone needed clean water, and Rimuru was here, and that was enough. In the deep places, the fragment that had been AzeRoth watched and remembered, and wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, the end of one cycle might allow space for something new to begin. Not corruption, not order, not chaos, not zealotry, just the radical possibility that power could exist without demanding payment. That strength could be used for protection rather than domination, that in a world defined by cosmic conflicts, someone might choose to simply help because they could. The whisper faded, but the question remained echoing through stone and madness, and the slow dissolution of an echo that had glimpsed something it had never expected to see: hope. The convergence began 3 days after Rimuru's encounter with the fragment. Word had spread through the forgotten peoples of the Barrens faster than any formal communication network could achieve. Quilboar spoke to Kobold. Kobold whispered to Gnoll. Gnoll traded information with goblin refugees who had fled failed cartels and corporate purges. The message was always the same, simplified through repetition, until it became almost mythic in its simplicity. A blue spirit had come to the wasteland. It asked for nothing. It gave everything that mattered: water, food, shelter, protection. And then it moved on, seeking others who needed help, leaving behind camps that had transformed overnight from death vigils into communities with a future. Rimuru had not intended to become a symbol. The slime simply moved through the barrens, responding to distress signals that Ciel detected, intervening in conflicts that would have ended in massacres, creating resources where there had been only scarcity. Each action was discrete individual responding to immediate need, rather than following any grand strategy. But in a world governed by cosmic forces and grand designs, individual actions aggregated into patterns. And patterns attracted attention. The Void noticed first, because the Void always noticed when hope appeared where despair should have reigned. Herald Cathazun manifested from the shadow of a dead tree, its form writhing with tentacles that existed in multiple dimensions. Simultaneously, its presence a weight on sanity itself. The entity had been sent to investigate the anomaly, to determine whether corruption was possible, and if not, whether elimination was necessary. Cathazun found Rimuru at the edge of a kobold encampment, the slime in the process of purifying a contaminated water source. The Herald observed in silence, studying the anomaly's techniques, searching for the telltale signs of void influence. Found none. The entity's work was clean, efficient, asking nothing from those it helped. This was wrong. This violated every principle by which the void operated. Power demanded payment. Assistance required corruption. Nothing was given without strings attached. Yet here was an entity that simply helped and moved on, leaving no madness in its wake, no whispers that could be exploited later. Cathazun decided that elimination was the appropriate response. The Herald's attack came without warning. Reality itself twisting as tentacles erupted from impossible angles, each one dripping with essences that could drive mortals mad, with a touch that could corrupt the very concept of thought. The kobolds scattered in terror, recognizing instinctively the presence of something that predated reason, that existed only to unmake sanity and replace it with glorious madness. Rimuru's response was instantaneous. Universal barrier expanded in a sphere that encompassed the entire encampment, and when the Herald's corruption touched that barrier, it simply stopped. Not reflected, not absorbed, simply negated at the fundamental level, as if it had encountered a wall built from the concept of immunity itself. Cathazun pressed harder, pulling power from the void, beyond the void, channeling energies that had driven entire worlds into screaming collapse. The tentacles multiplied, became hundreds, became thousands, each one a vector for madness and entropy and the beautiful dissolution of coherent thought. The barrier did not even ripple. The herald paused, reassessing. This anomaly was not simply resistant to corruption. It existed in a state that made corruption conceptually impossible. The void's power could not find purchase because there was nothing to corrupt, no doubt to amplify, no fear to feed, no ambition to twist, just a fundamental certainty that helping those who needed help was the correct action, and that certainty left no room for the whispers that were the void's primary weapon. Cathazun was preparing to withdraw to report that corruption was impossible and direct confrontation inadvisable when the sky above the barrens tore open. The Valorjar descended in formation 70 of Odin's finest warriors, riding on the backs of storm drakes, their weapons crackling with the barely contained fury of the Prime Designate himself. At their head flew Heimdall, the Watcher, who guarded the gates of the halls of valor, his horn silent but his gaze fixed on the scene below, with the intensity of someone who had been ordered to assess a threat that his liege considered existential. The warrior formation man surrounded the area in perfect tactical positioning, cutting off retreat vectors, establishing overlapping fields of fire, implementing protocols that had been refined over millennia of combat against forces that sought to disrupt the Titan's grand design. They had come prepared for a threat. What they found was a blue slime protecting Kobold from a void herald, and the cognitive dissonance of that image gave even Heimdall pause. The Watcher descended his Stormdrake landing with thunder-crack precision. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of Odin's authority, each word a declaration that brooked no dissent. Anomaly. You are commanded to cease all activities and submit to Titan custody. Your presence disrupts the carefully maintained balance of this world. Prime Designate Odin has decreed that you cannot be permitted to continue operating without oversight. Rimuru did not move the slime form hovering between the Valorjar and the Kobold camp. The universal barrier still active, still containing Cathazun's assault. The situation's absurdity was not lost on the entity that had once been Satoru Mikami office worker, who had died saving a colleague and been reborn as something that cosmic forces could not classify. I'm helping people, Rimuru said simply. That's all I'm doing, helping people who need help. Irrelevant, Heimdall replied. Your methods, your origins, your very existence falls outside Titan parameters. What cannot be categorized must be contained. What cannot be contained must be eliminated. This is not cruelty. This is necessity. Order must be maintained. Cathazun, recognizing an opportunity when one presented itself, spoke for the first time, its voice a chorus of whispers that scraped against sanity like claws on glass. How typical of the Titans. Something exists outside your narrow definitions, so you seek to imprison it. Just as you imprisoned us. Just as you have imprisoned every force that does not conform to your vision of perfect order. Heimdall's gaze shifted to the herald, and his expression hardened. Void corruption. Of course you would be here seeking to exploit this situation. The Herald of Cathaz will be purged along with the anomaly. The Watcher raised his hand, and the Valorjar formations shifted weapons training on both Rimuru and Cathazun simultaneously. Above them, the storm drakes began to gather lightning preparation for an assault that would level the entire area Kobold camp and all. Rimuru felt the shift in the air, felt the buildup of energies sufficient to reshape the landscape, felt the absolute certainty with which these warriors prepared to follow their orders regardless of collateral damage. The Kobold would die. Cathazun would probably escape, and the Valorjar would file a report that the anomaly had been eliminated. Mission accomplished, balance maintained. The slime made a decision. Imaginary space opened, and the Kobold camp simply vanished. Transported to a pocket dimension where time moved differently, where they would be safe, regardless of what happened in the next few minutes. The universal barrier expanded further now, encompassing both Cathazun and the nearest Valarjar formations, trapping all parties in a sphere where external interference was impossible. "No one else dies today," Rimuru said, and there was something in the slime's voice that made even Himdall hesitate. Not power. Power was expected, but certainty. The absolute conviction that what was about to happen was necessary, unavoidable, and fundamentally right. The Valarjar attacked first, because warriors of Odin did not hesitate when their orders were clear. Lightning arced from stormdrake mouths. Spears flew with trajectories calculated by millennia of combat experience. War cries echoed with the fury of champions who had never known defeat. Every attack stopped at the barrier. Every weapon clattered harmlessly against the sphere's surface. Every burst of lightning dispersed into harmless static. Cathazun attacked from within tentacles, seeking to exploit the fact that Rimuru's attention was divided. Corruption, attempting to find purchase in the moment of distraction. But there was no distraction. Thought acceleration was active, and from Rimuru's perspective, the battle was unfolding at a pace that allowed consideration of each threat individually, response to each attack with the appropriate counter. The Herald's corruption met law manipulation and found itself redefined out of existence. Not destroyed, not reflected. Simply changed at a fundamental level until it was no longer corruption, but inert energy, purposeless and harmless. Himdall watched as his warrior's assault failed to generate any meaningful damage, watched as the Void Herald's attacks were negated with casual precision and recalculated. This was not an entity that could be overwhelmed with conventional force. This was something that operated on rules outside the Titan framework. Something that could simply decide that attacks did not work and make that decision reality. The Watcher signaled for the assault to pause, though his warriors maintained their positions. When he spoke again, there was grudging respect in his voice, the acknowledgement of a warrior recognizing superior capability. You possess power sufficient to challenge the Titan systems. Yet you use it to protect Kobold, to provide water and food to peoples that the Grand Design has deemed expendable. The word carried weight acknowledgement of a truth that the Titans rarely voiced. Why? Before Rimuru could answer, Cathazun laughed, the sound cascading through octaves that human ears were not designed to process. Because the anomaly exists outside your tired binary. Not order, not chaos, not light, not void, just someone who helps because they can. It's almost beautiful in its simplicity. It's certainly terrifying in its implications. The Herald's form began to collapse, withdrawing from physical manifestation. I came to corrupt or destroy. I can do neither. The Void Lords will be informed that this entity cannot be turned and should not be directly engaged. We have learned over eons that some battles are not worth fighting. Cathazun dispersed into shadow and whispers, leaving only a final observation that echoed through the barrier. The Titans could learn that lesson, but they won't. Order demands control. Control requires containment. And containment of something that cannot be contained will only breed conflict. Enjoy your war anomaly. You didn't seek it, but it's coming anyway. Himdall watched the Herald depart and turned his attention back to Rimuru. The Watcher's expression was complex, warring instincts clearly visible. Duty demanded he continue the assault report back to Odin that the anomaly had been engaged and destroyed. But honor the warrior's code that predated even the Titan's grand design, suggested that something was fundamentally wrong with attacking an entity whose only crime was helping those who needed help. Prime Designate Odin will not accept this outcome, Heimdall said finally. You have demonstrated power outside Titan parameters. You have interfered with the natural order. You have created instability in systems that have maintained balance for millennia. I gave Kobold clean water, Rimuru replied. I stopped Centaur from killing Quilboar children. I built shelters for Knoll who were dying of exposure. If your Titan systems call that instability, then your systems are broken. The words hung in the air, a challenge that could not be ignored. An accusation that struck at the very heart of what the Titans claimed to represent. Order, protection, the maintenance of systems that allowed life to flourish. Yet here was evidence that those systems had blind spots, that in their focus on grand designs and cosmic balance, they had forgotten to care whether individuals lived or died. Heimdall was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weariness that suggested this was not the first time he had encountered this particular paradox. Return the kobold. Withdraw from this region. Allow the natural order to resume. These are not requests. These are commands from Prime Designate Odin himself. No, the refusal was simple absolute, without room for negotiation. Rimuru had made a choice, and that choice was not going to be unmade, because cosmic entities found it inconvenient. The universal barrier dissolved and the kobold camp reappeared exactly where it had been, the refugees, blinking in confusion at having experienced what felt like no time at all. They looked up at the Valarjar formations, at the storm drakes crackling with barely contained lightning, and understood immediately that they stood at the center of forces beyond their comprehension. Rimuru descended to ground level, placing the slime form between the warriors and the camp. The message clear. If the Valarjar wanted to harm these people, they would have to go through the anomaly first. Heimdall understood the gesture, understood the commitment implicit in that positioning. The Watcher had spent millennia evaluating threats, distinguishing between entities that postured and entities that would follow through. This was not posturing. You would fight the Valarjar to protect Kobold. I would. You would stand against Prime Designate Odin himself, if necessary. You would make yourself the enemy of every force that seeks to maintain the Titan's grand design. If that's what it takes to help people who need help, yes. Heimdall studied the blue slime, this impossible anomaly that spoke with such certainty about concepts that should have been too simple to matter in the grand scheme of cosmic conflicts. The Watcher made a decision, then one that would likely earn him censure from Odin, but that felt in this moment like the right choice. I will report that the anomaly cannot be contained through conventional means. I will recommend that Prime Designate Odin consider alternative approaches. I will not order my warriors to attack an entity whose only crime is compassion, even if that compassion disrupts carefully maintained systems. The Watcher mounted his storm drake, signaling for the formations to withdraw. But before departing, he turned back to Rimuru with a final warning. Odin will not accept this outcome. The Prime Designate considers himself the ultimate authority on AzeRoth's defense. You have challenged that authority. He will respond, and when he does, it will not be with a Watcher and 80 warriors. It will be with the full might of the Halls of Valor. I'll be here, Rimuru said simply, helping people, same as always. The Valarjar departed thunder marking their ascent, leaving behind a confusion of kobold refugees who had just witnessed cosmic forces converge and diverge over their survival. An elder approached Rimuru cautiously, whiskers twitching with uncertainty. Why they fight over us, we nobody. We nothing. Just kobold trying to not die. Rimuru looked at the elder, at the camp behind them, at the children peering out from behind makeshift shelters, with eyes that had learned too young that the world was vast and terrifying and indifferent to their suffering. You're not nobody, the slime said quietly. You're someone, and someone is always worth helping. As night fell over the southern barrens, Rimuru sat at the edge of the kobold camp and considered what had just occurred. 3 cosmic forces had converged on this single location. The Void had attempted corruption and retreated when it proved impossible. The Titans had demanded submission and withdrawn when faced with absolute refusal. And caught between them had been refugees who possessed no power, no cosmic significance, no place in any grand design. Yet their survival had become the point around which cosmic forces pivoted. Ciel's analysis was typically clinical. 3 major cosmic factions now aware of anomalies' capabilities and operational parameters. Probability of future conflict, 97.3%. Recommended action, establish permanent defensive position. Prepare for escalation. But beneath the clinical assessment, even CL seemed to recognize the strange poetry of the situation. The forgotten peoples of the Barrens were beginning to gather, drawn by whispers of a protector who asked for nothing, who gave without expecting payment, who stood between them and the violence that had defined their existence. They were coming not as supplicants seeking a new master, but as people who had finally found someone who saw value in their lives. And in the deep places, in the spaces between realities, in the halls where cosmic forces contemplated their next moves, three very different entities reached similar conclusions. The anomaly could not be corrupted, could not be contained, could not be intimidated, but perhaps it could be destroyed. And if destruction proved impossible, then perhaps it could simply be ignored, left to waste its power on meaningless acts of kindness in forgotten corners of the world. While the great powers continued their eternal conflicts, they did not yet understand that those forgotten corners were exactly where Rimuru intended to be, that those meaningless acts of kindness were the entire point, that power without purpose was just noise, and the slime had no interest in noise. The cosmic forces would learn, but learning would come at a cost, and that cost would be measured in the growing realization that someone had finally chosen to stand not for order or chaos, not for light or void, but simply for the people caught between forces that had never cared whether they lived or died. In the kobold camp, children slept with full bellies and clean water for the first time in their lives. In the Quillbore settlements, warriors stood watch with renewed purpose, knowing someone cared if they survived the night. In Knoll caves and goblin hideouts and a dozen other pockets of forgotten peoples, word continued to spread. Sanctuary was coming, not imposed from above, not demanded through conquest, but built from the ground up, one camp at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one choice at a time to help. Because helping was possible. And the cosmic forces, for all their power, for all their grand designs, had no protocols for dealing with someone who simply refused to play their games. The settlement that would become Sanctuary began as nothing more than a clearing in the wasteland, a place where Rimuru had decided that running was less productive than building. In the week following the confrontation with the Valorjar, the forgotten peoples of the Barrens had continued to arrive. Not in organized caravans, not following any coordinated plan, but in the scattered, cautious way of those who had learned that hope was often a prelude to disappointment. They came in small groups, families clutching what few possessions they had managed to preserve, elders, supporting each other across terrain that offered no mercy to the weak. Quillbore came first, those who had survived Rimuru's initial interventions and spread word to their scattered clans. Then Kobold, emerging from collapsed mines and desperate hideouts. Knoll packs arrived, their usual aggression tempered by exhaustion and the slim chance that maybe, just maybe, this strange blue entity meant what it said about protection. Trogs shambled in from the rocky highlands, their simple minds grasping that this place offered something their former territories did not: safety. Even Murloc appeared, drawn from contaminated coastlines by rumors that traveled through networks the surface races never understood. By the end of that first week, nearly 200 souls had gathered in what had once been empty wasteland. They did not trust each other. Quillbore and Centaur had been enemies for generations. Knoll packs normally preyed on Kobold. Trog were considered monsters by most civilized races. But they all shared one thing: nowhere else to go, and a blue slime that had promised them a chance to survive. Rimuru surveyed the gathering with something approaching trepidation. The slime had helped individuals, had intervened in discrete crises, had never intended to become responsible for an actual community. But here they were, and abandoning them now would be worse than never helping at all. CL's analysis was characteristically practical. Population 217 individuals. Composition multiple species with historical animosity. Resource requirements significant. Current infrastructure non-existent. Recommended action, systematic development of sustainable settlement. The first challenge was basic survival. 200 beings needed water, food, shelter, and some form of organization that prevented old hatreds from erupting into violence within the camp itself. Rimuru began with the fundamentals, using material creation to establish a central well that drew from deep aquifers, its water purified through processes that the refugees did not need to understand, only trust. Food was more complex. The barons offered little natural sustenance, and Rimuru could create rations, but not an actual food economy. The solution came from an unexpected source, a quill-boar elder named Thornweaver, who approached the slime with a proposal wrapped in the cautious dignity of someone offering expertise rather than begging for handouts. "The land is dead, yes," Thornweaver said, gesturing to the barren soil. "But land can be awakened. My people knew the old ways before the wars, before the dying. If you can provide water, we can grow food. Not much, not quickly, but enough." Rimuru provided more than water. The slime's abilities allowed for rapid soil enrichment. The introduction of nutrients that would have taken years to accumulate naturally. Within days, the first experimental crops were planted, tended by quillboar, who remembered agricultural traditions their younger generations had never learned. Shelter evolved from temporary tents to more permanent structures as knoll construction crews, working alongside trog labor, began to raise buildings from stone and reclaimed timber. The knoll brought organizational skills honed by pack dynamics. The trog provided raw strength and an innate understanding of stone that rivaled dwarf craftsmanship. Together supervised by Rimuru's ability to rapidly prototype designs and correct structural flaws, they built a settlement that could withstand the Baron's harsh environment. But infrastructure was the easy part. The harder challenge was preventing the settlement from tearing itself apart from within. The first serious incident occurred on the 9th day, when a quillboar warrior and a knoll hunter nearly killed each other over a perceived slight regarding territory boundaries. Rimuru arrived to find both parties armed, their respective communities backing them, the entire settlement teetering on the edge of violence that would destroy everything they had built. The slime did not use power to separate them, did not impose peace through force. Instead, Rimuru simply positioned between the two groups and spoke with the calm certainty of someone who would not be moved. "You can kill each other if you want. I won't stop you. But if you do, you're leaving. Both of you. Your families too. Because this place is for people who want to survive, not people who want to continue the same wars that destroyed everything you had before." The quillboar warrior bristled. "He insulted my clan's honor. That cannot stand. Your clan's honor won't matter when you're dead in the dust with no one left to remember you," Rimuru replied. "Here's what matters. You both have children. Those children need food and water and shelter. Do they get those things because you preserved your honor? Or do they die because you couldn't let go of an insult?" The knoll hunter growled low in his throat. "Our pack does not back down from challenges." "Then challenge the barons. Challenge the fact that centaur raids happen every few days. Challenge the reality that everyone here was dying before they arrived. Challenge me to provide better housing or more food. But challenging each other, that's just choosing a faster way to die." The two warriors stared at the blue slime, this entity that possessed power to level mountains but used it to dig wells and grow crops. The cognitive dissonance was almost painful. Power was supposed to dominate, to command, to demand obedience through threat of violence. But this power simply stood between them and refused to move, refused to choose sides, refused to allow their conflict to destroy what had been built. Slowly, weapons lowered. Not from defeat, not from fear, but from the gradual realization that maybe, just maybe, survival was more important than honor. and that honor had been killing them for generations. From that moment, a rule emerged, unwritten but understood by all who came to the settlement. Old wars stayed outside. Old grudges remained buried. Inside the boundaries that Rimuru established, there was only one question that mattered. Are you here to survive, or are you here to die? Most chose survival. By the third week, the settlement had grown to over 400 individuals. Word continued to spread through channels that the great powers did not monitor through networks of the desperate and displaced. A harpy flock arrived, their leader, a scarred matriarch named Windshriek, who landed before Rimuru with the wary aggression of someone expecting betrayal. "We are not welcome anywhere," Windshriek stated, not quite a question, not quite a challenge. "Surface races hunt us. Horde kills us. Alliance exterminates us as monsters. Why would you be different?" Rimuru looked at the harpy, at her flock hovering uncertainly behind her, at the scars that told stories of a life spent fighting just to exist. "I don't care what you are. I care whether you need help. Do you?" The harpy matriarch was silent for a long moment, her raptor eyes searching for the trap, for the condition, for the price that would be demanded. Found nothing but honest question. "Yes," Windshriek said finally. "We need help." "Then you're welcome here. Same rules as everyone else. No wars inside the settlement. No hunting people who live here. If you can follow those rules, you can stay." The harpies settled in the rocky outcroppings that ringed the settlement, establishing nests that provided aerial surveillance and early warning of approaching threats. Within days, they had proven their value, spotting a centaur war party before it could launch a surprise attack, giving the settlement's defenders time to prepare. The settlement's defenses had evolved organically. Rimuru had made it clear that violence in defense of the community was acceptable, even necessary. The slime could not be everywhere at once, could not personally stop every threat. So the residents learned to defend themselves, learned to work together, despite species differences, learned that a quillbore warrior and a knoll hunter fighting side by side were more effective than either fighting alone. It was after the Centaur War Party's defeat that someone first called the settlement Sanctuary. And the name spread with the speed of something that had always been true, just waiting for someone to voice it. Sanctuary, not haven, not refuge. Sanctuary. A place where the forgotten could exist without apology, without having to prove their worth to cosmic forces that had never cared whether they lived or died. The great powers noticed, of course. They had never stopped watching. But their responses varied in ways that Rimuru was beginning to understand, reflected deeper philosophical differences. The Void observed, but did not interfere. Kethazun had reported that corruption was impossible, and the Void Lords had calculated that this anomaly, left alone, would occupy itself with meaningless charity while they continued their eternal plans. Let the slime play protector to kobold and quillbore. Such activities posed no threat to their designs. The Titan's response was more measured. After Himdall's report, Odin had entered a period of contemplation that his advisors found uncharacteristic. The Prime Designate was not known for hesitation. Yet he had issued no orders regarding the anomaly, had mobilized no forces for a second confrontation. Some whispered that Odin was impressed. Others suggested he was simply waiting for the anomaly to make a mistake that would justify overwhelming response. But it was the arrival of emissaries from the Alliance and Horde that marked Sanctuary's transition from hidden refuge to something that could no longer be ignored. They came separately, carefully, each faction having detected the settlement through their own intelligence networks. The Alliance sent a diplomat from Theramore, a woman named Elena Gracewing, who approached with the cautious optimism of someone who had spent too long mediating conflicts to believe in simple solutions. The Horde sent an orc warrior named AzeRoth, scarred veteran of a dozen campaigns, who rode into Sanctuary with the blunt directness of someone who preferred honest threats to diplomatic evasion. Both arrived on the same day, found themselves facing each other across Sanctuary's central square, and immediately understood that this meeting would define how the great powers responded to this new reality. Rimuru met them together, refusing to play favorites, refusing to acknowledge that these factions considered themselves separate when, from the slime's perspective, they were just two more groups fighting over resources, while the weak suffered. Elena spoke first, her diplomatic training evident in carefully chosen words. I represent the Alliance's interests in this region. We've received reports of a significant gathering of traditionally hostile species. The Alliance needs assurance that this settlement poses no threat to our territories or interests. AzeRoth snorted. Speak plainly, human. You want to know if this place is a problem you need to solve with soldiers. The orc turned to Rimuru, respect in his gaze that was reserved for those who had proven themselves in battle. I saw what remained of the Centaur war party. Efficient, minimal casualties. Warriors defeated, but not slaughtered. The Horde respects strength, especially strength tempered with wisdom. We also want to know your intentions. Rimuru looked between them, these representatives of factions that commanded armies, that shaped the politics of continents, that considered themselves the arbiters of AzeRoth's future, and spoke with the same directness that had defined every interaction since arriving in this world. My intention is to help people who need help. That's it. No territorial ambitions, no political agenda, no interest in your wars. The people here were dying. Now they're not. If that's a problem for the Alliance or the Horde, then you have strange definitions of problems. Elena frowned diplomat's instincts, detecting sincerity and finding it almost offensive in its simplicity. But surely you understand that concentrating multiple hostile species in one location creates strategic concerns. Gnoll packs have raided Alliance settlements for generations. Quillboar have attacked Horde caravans. These species cannot simply coexist without oversight. They're coexisting now, Rimuru said, gesturing to the settlement where Quillboar farmers worked alongside Gnoll builders, where Harpy scouts shared intelligence with Trog sentries. No oversight required except the understanding that survival matters more than old hatreds. AzeRoth studied the settlement with the tactical eye of someone who had spent his life evaluating threats and opportunities. You've built something unusual here, but unusual does not mean sustainable. What happens when you leave, when the blue spirit departs and these people return to their nature? This is their nature, Rimuru replied. Cooperation, survival, building instead of destroying. The wars you remember were never about nature. They were about scarcity, about having to fight for resources that should have been abundant, about cosmic forces that played their games while people starved. The slime paused, then continued with an edge that made both emissaries pay closer attention. I'm not asking for recognition from the Alliance or the Horde. I'm not seeking trade agreements or military alliances. I'm telling you that Sanctuary exists, that the people here will defend themselves if attacked, and that we will continue accepting anyone who needs help, regardless of species or faction affiliation. Elena and AzeRoth exchanged glances. Professional adversaries united in their uncertainty about how to respond to an entity that refused to play by any established rules. The Alliance cannot officially recognize a settlement that harbors species considered hostile, Elena said carefully. But neither can we ignore a stabilizing force in a region that has been chaotic for generations. I will recommend to my superiors that Sanctuary be granted provisional neutral status, monitored, but not molested. AzeRoth grunted agreement. The Horde has no quarrel with those who seek only to survive. We will respect Sanctuary's boundaries as long as Sanctuary respects ours. But know this, if your people raid our settlements, neutrality ends. There won't be raids, Rimuru said with certainty. People with full bellies and safe homes don't need to raid. That was always the solution. You just never bothered to implement it. The emissaries departed with more questions than answers. but with the understanding that Sanctuary was now a recognized reality, however uncomfortably it fit into existing power structures. That evening, as the settlement's first moon rose over newly planted fields and sturdy structures, Rimuru stood at the boundary and surveyed what had been built in less than a month. 400 souls who had been dying now had a chance at life. Children played in streets that did not exist a week ago. Elders gathered around fires to share stories rather than to mourn losses. Thornweaver approached the Quillbore elder, moving with the careful dignity of someone bearing important news. "The harvest will succeed," the elder said simply. "Not abundant, but enough. We will feed ourselves within 2 months. After that, we will have surplus to trade." "Trade with who?" Rimuru asked. "With whoever will trade with us. Alliance, Horde, independent merchants. We have skills, all of us. Quillbore knowledge of the land. Null organizational abilities. Trog craftsmanship. Kobold mining expertise. Harpy scouting. We are not charity cases requiring endless support. We are a community. We will contribute." Rimuru felt something shift at those words. This had begun as rescue operation, as series of individual interventions to prevent immediate deaths. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more. These people were not waiting to be saved. They were saving themselves, using the foundation Rimuru had provided to build actual futures. "You don't need me anymore," the slime said, recognition dawning. "We will always need you," Thornweaver corrected gently. "But not to do everything for us. We need you to stand between us and the forces that would destroy what we're building. We need you to be the shield while we become the community. Can you do that?" Rimuru thought about Algalon's observations about cosmic forces and grand designs, about the Void's corruption and the Titan's order and the Light's zealotry, thought about how all of them operated from positions of power, seeking to impose their vision on those below. This was different. This was people asking not for salvation, but for partnership. Not for domination, but for protection. Not for a ruler, but for a guardian. "Yes," Rimuru said. "I can do that." In the halls of valor, Odin received reports about Sanctuary's growing stability, about alliance and horde recognition, about the settlement's increasing self-sufficiency. The Prime Designate considered the implications and found himself facing a puzzle he could not solve through conventional application of force. The anomaly was building something that violated every principle of Titan design, yet was somehow achieving the very stability that the Titans claimed to seek. Order through cooperation rather than imposition. Peace through abundance rather than domination. Strength through community rather than hierarchy. It should not work. By every metric the Titans used, it should collapse into chaos within months. Yet preliminary projections suggested it would not only survive, but thrive. Odin made a decision that surprised even himself. He would watch. He would wait. And if this impossible experiment somehow succeeded, where the Titans' grand designs had required constant intervention, then perhaps there was something to learn after all. In Sanctuary, children fell asleep in safe beds. Farmers tended crops that would actually mature to harvest. Defenders stood watch knowing they protected something worth defending. And throughout it all, a blue slime moved between them. Not as ruler, but as guardian. Not as master, but as partner. The forgotten peoples of AzeRoth had found a home. Not because a cosmic force had decided to save them, but because they had chosen to save themselves, and someone had been willing to help. Sanctuary had been built. Now it would need to be defended. And that defense, Rimuru suspected, would test everything the slime had learned about power, about purpose, and about what it meant to stand for something in a world where cosmic forces had very different ideas about who deserved to survive. Sanctuary had existed for 47 days when the light arrived. The settlement had grown beyond even Rimuru's optimistic projections. Nearly 600 souls now called it home, with more arriving weekly. The experimental crops had exceeded expectations the first harvest, providing enough surplus that Thornweaver had begun negotiating trade agreements with goblin merchants brave enough to venture into what most considered a wasteland. The buildings had evolved from functional to permanent stone structures that spoke of people planning for futures measured in years rather than days. Children played in streets that had names now. Elders taught trades to young ones, eager to learn skills that had nearly died out. The Quillbore Knoll patrol system had proven so effective that raids had ceased entirely, Centaur war parties finding easier targets than a settlement that could deploy coordinated defenses within minutes of threat detection. It was by any reasonable metric a success. A community built from nothing thriving in impossible conditions, proving that cooperation could achieve what cosmic forces had insisted required domination, which was precisely why it could not be permitted to continue. High Exarch Irel arrived at dawn, her Draenei form radiant with the light's power, her eyes blazing with the absolute certainty of someone who knew without doubt that her cause was righteous. Behind her marched 200 light-bound zealots, former Maghar orcs who had been saved by forcible conversion, their eyes empty of will but burning with holy fire. Behind them came constructs of pure light entities shaped from faith made manifest beautiful and terrible in their perfect devotion. The army stopped at Sanctuary's boundary, and Yrel stepped forward alone, her voice carrying across the settlement with a resonance that made ears ring and hearts flutter. People of this settlement, I am High Exarch Irel, servant of the light eternal. I have come to offer you salvation from the darkness that has taken root here. Lay down your arms. Accept the light's embrace. Be purified of the corruption that dwells among you. On Sanctuary's walls, defenders looked to each other with confusion. Corruption. They had Quillbore farmers and knoll carpenters. They had Trog miners and kobold engineers. They had built something from nothing using cooperation and hard work. What corruption could this zealot be talking about? Rimuru appeared at the gate, the blue slime form settling into a position between Yrel and the settlement. When the entity spoke, there was weariness in the voice that suggested this was a conversation the slime had hoped to avoid, but had known was inevitable. We're not interested in salvation. Everyone here is free to believe what they want, free to follow whatever faith speaks to them, but nobody's being forced into anything, light included. Irel's expression shifted disappointment, mixing with the unwavering conviction of a zealot who could not comprehend rejection of obvious truth. You do not understand. The light does not ask. The light does not negotiate. The light simply is, and all must embrace it or be purified by its radiance. This settlement, this gathering of species that should be enemies, this unnatural peace built on the foundation of an entity that exists outside the cosmic order. It is an abomination that must be cleansed. We're helping people survive, Rimuru said, keeping the voice level despite growing frustration. Building homes, growing food. That's it. If your light has a problem with survival, then your light is the abomination. The words hung in the air, blasphemy by any measure the zealots understood. Behind Yrel, the lightbound began to murmur, hands moving to weapons, the constructs of pure light beginning to glow with increasing intensity. Yrel raised one hand, and silence fell. When she spoke again, there was sorrow in her voice. The grief of someone forced to destroy something beautiful, because it violated principles she held above all else. Then you leave me no choice. Sanctuary will be purified. Its people will be given the light's salvation, whether they accept willingly or not. And you anomaly that exists outside the cosmic order, you will be unmade so thoroughly that not even memory of your interference will remain. The attack came without further warning. The lightbound charged holy fire erupting from their weapons constructs of pure radiance, surging forward like a tide of zealous certainty. Behind them, Irel herself began to channel power, drawn from the light eternal energies, sufficient to burn cities, to scour corruption from entire continents, focused now on one blue slime and the settlement it protected. Universal barrier erupted instantly, a dome encompassing all of Sanctuary. And when the light's assault struck that barrier, the resulting collision sent shockwaves rippling across the barrens for miles. The Lightbound's charge broke against the barrier like water against stone, their weapons unable to penetrate, their holy fire dispersing harmlessly. But Irel was not deterred. She poured more power into her assault, drawing on reserves that would have exhausted lesser champions, channeling the light's fury, with the conviction of someone who believed absolutely in the righteousness of her cause. The barrier held, but Rimuru felt the pressure mounting, felt the sheer magnitude of power that zealous certainty could channel. And then, with thunder that shook the earth, Odin arrived. The Prime Designate descended from the sky with the Valorjar in full formation, storm drakes darkening the horizon, warriors numbering in the hundreds. But Odin himself came alone, landing between the Lightbound and Sanctuary's barrier with the authority of someone who had ruled the halls of valor for millennia and would not tolerate challenges to his decisions. High Exarch, Odin's voice boomed, carrying the weight of cosmic authority. Stand down. This settlement operates under provisional observation by Titan authority. You have no jurisdiction here. Irel turned to face the Prime Designate, her expression shifting to something between respect and defiance. With respect, Prime Designate, the Light's authority supersedes even the Titans. This anomaly threatens the cosmic order. It must be dealt with. The anomaly, Odin replied, his single eye blazing with power, has built something I have been observing for 47 days. A stable community of species that should be at war. A self-sustaining settlement in land deemed uninhabitable. An experiment in cooperation that violates every principle I have spent eons enforcing. The Prime Designate paused, and when he continued, there was something in his voice that might have been wonder, might have been uncertainty, might have been the first stirrings of doubt. And it works. Against all Titan projections, against every model we have developed over millions of years, this impossible settlement not only survives, but thrives. I will not permit it to be destroyed before I understand how. Irel stared at Odin, incomprehension warring with her zealous conviction. You would protect corruption. You would shield an entity that exists outside the cosmic order. Prime Designate, I expected better from. She never finished the sentence. Reality itself twisted, and from the shadows between shadows, the void manifested. Cathazun returned, but not alone. With the Herald came a dozen lesser entities, void-touched beings that existed partially in this reality and partially in the spaces beyond sanity. They did not attack. They simply appeared surrounding the entire area, their presence a weight on consciousness that made thought difficult and certainty impossible. The Herald's voice echoed from everywhere, and nowhere amused and malevolent in equal measure. How delightful! The Light and the Titans, ancient enemies, forced into temporary alliance by something neither can categorize. And all of you so certain, so convinced of your righteousness, your necessity, your absolute right to reshape reality according to your design. Cathazun drifted closer to the confrontation's center, tentacles writhing with barely contained power. But here is what you fail to understand. The anomaly is not a threat. The anomaly is a mirror. It shows you what you are, strips away the justifications and the grand designs, reveals the simple truth that all of you have spent eons denying. And what truth is that, creature of madness? Odin demanded, his hand on Stormbreaker, ready for battle. That power without compassion is just violence wearing a crown. That order imposed through domination creates nothing but resentment waiting to explode. That salvation demanded at sword point is just slavery dressed in holy language. The Herald gestured towards Sanctuary, where 600 beings watched the cosmic forces converge over their survival. The anomaly helped them, did not convert them. did not conquer them, did not corrupt them, simply helped. And in doing so, created something none of you have managed in all your eons of cosmic conflict. Actual peace, genuine cooperation, strength built on mutual respect rather than enforced hierarchy. The void speaks of peace. Irel's voice dripped with contempt. You who whisper madness and corruption, who seek only to unmake reality itself. Oh, we still seek to unmake reality. Cathazun laughed. But we are honest about it. We do not claim to save you while forcing you to abandon everything that makes you yourself. We do not promise order while grinding civilization beneath the weight of inflexible systems. We offer madness, and we are very clear about the price. The Herald's tentacles spread wide, encompassing all three forces, but the anomaly offers help. Nothing more, nothing less. And somehow that simple offer has built something that threatens all of you more than any army, any crusade, any corruption ever could. Because if this works, if Sanctuary succeeds, then what excuse do any of you have for the suffering you've caused in the name of your grand designs? Silence fell. Cosmic forces facing a question none had wanted to confront. And in that silence, Rimuru spoke the slime's voice, cutting through the tension with a clarity that made even Cathazun pause. I'm done listening to you all debate philosophy while people's lives hang in the balance. Here's what's going to happen. Rel, you're going to take your lightbound and leave. Odin, you're already observing, so keep observing. Cathazun, you're going to stop using this as an opportunity to monologue about cosmic hypocrisy. The slime form expanded, and around it power began to manifest. Not gradually, not building to a crescendo. Simply there, instantly, vast beyond measure. AzeRoth stirred the god of the void that was not the void. These entities knew the ultimate skill that had consumed and integrated other ultimate skills until it had become something that existed outside their framework entirely. Multidimensional barrier erupted outward. But this was not the defensive sphere from before. This was a prison, a cage that encompassed all three cosmic forces, simultaneously separating them from their backup, from their armies, from everything but the immediate confrontation. You want to fight over whether Sanctuary gets to exist, Rimuru said. And for the first time since arriving in AzeRoth, there was anger in the voice. Not rage, not fury, but the cold, controlled anger of someone who had been patient and was now done being patient. Then fight me, not them. Not the Quillbore farmers, or the Knoll builders, or the kobold children who finally have enough food to grow healthy, me. True Dragon release activated, and the slime form transformed. Not into something draconic, but into pure energy, into power, compressed into a shape that minds could barely process. The wooden carving a Quillbore child had given as treasure sat at the core of that transformation, a reminder of why this mattered. Why backing down was not an option. Irel attacked first because zealots always attacked first. Holy fire erupted with the intensity of a sun going nova. Light concentrated into a beam that could unmake lesser beings at the molecular level. The attack struck Rimuru and simply dispersed energies, scattering harmlessly against law manipulation that had redefined what light meant, had changed the fundamental relationship between this power and the entity it targeted. Odin was more measured. The Prime Designate called down lightning from the storm drakes, circling above the barrier, channeled the fury of tempests. Through Stormbreaker brought to bear power that had leveled mountains and shattered armies. The lightning struck, and Rimuru absorbed it, not blocked it, not reflected it, simply took that energy and stored it within AzeRoth's infinite space, adding it to reserves that were already incomprehensible. Cathazun did not attack. The Herald simply watched tentacles' coiled fascination overriding any impulse toward violence. This was unprecedented. This was an entity facing down three cosmic forces simultaneously and not being overwhelmed. This was what the fragment of AzeRoth had glimpsed and wondered at. This was possibility made manifest. Impossible. Irel breathed, her certainty cracking for the first time in years. The light cannot be denied. The light cannot fail. The light is just power. Rimuru interrupted the transformed state, speaking with multiple voices, harmonics that existed in dimensions mortal minds could not perceive. Like order is just power. Like the void is just power. You all treat your cosmic forces like their righteousness made manifest, but they're just tools. And tools used without wisdom only create suffering. The entity that had been a slime that had once been Satoru Mikami dying in a puddle of his own blood, trying to save a colleague, looked at these cosmic forces and saw them clearly for the first time. I'm stronger than all of you. Right now, in this moment, I could probably destroy any one of you. Maybe all three. But what would that accomplish? You'd just be replaced. The light would send another zealot. The Titans would dispatch another keeper. The void would corrupt another herald. And the cycle would continue just with different names. Rimuru's form began to contract, power compressing back into the familiar slime shape, the barrier remaining. But the threat implicit in that transformation fading. So here's my offer. I'll make it once. Sanctuary exists. The people here have chosen cooperation over conflict. If you can't accept that if your cosmic designs can't accommodate one small settlement where the forgotten find shelter, then attack. But know that I'll defend them, completely, absolutely, with every bit of power I possess. The slime settled to the ground, and when it spoke again, the voice was tired, carrying the weight of someone who had not asked for this responsibility, but had accepted it anyway. Or you can leave. Go back to your grand designs and cosmic conflicts. Let these people live their lives. Let them prove that cooperation works. Let them be the mirror Kathazun says they are. And maybe, just maybe, learn something from what they build. Irel stood frozen, her entire world view cracking under the weight of what she had just witnessed. The light had failed. Not because it was weak, but because the anomaly simply existed in a state where light's power could not touch it. All her certainty, all her conviction meant nothing against an entity that could simply decide that her attacks did not work. Odin lowered Stormbreaker, and in his gesture there was something like respect. The Prime Designate had spent millennia enforcing order, maintaining systems ensuring the Titan's grand design continued uninterrupted. But he had also been a warrior once, before cosmic responsibility had transformed him into something more, and warriors recognized when a battle could not be won. The Titans will continue to observe, Odin said formally, but we will not interfere. For now, Sanctuary has earned the right to prove itself. Do not make us regret this decision, anomaly. The Prime Designate departed the Valarjar formations, following thunder marking their ascent. On the ground, Irel remained her light-bound, waiting for orders that did not come. The High Exarch looked at Sanctuary, at the impossible community that should not exist, and felt her certainty crumble. I do not understand, she said quietly, speaking more to herself than to Rimuru. The light showed me the path. The light promised that all who followed would know peace. But you offer peace without demanding faith. How can that be? Because peace doesn't require everyone to believe the same thing, Rimuru replied gently. It just requires everyone to agree that survival matters more than being right. Irel stood silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I will consider what I have witnessed. This is not the end, anomaly, but perhaps it need not be war. The Lightbound departed, confusion evident in their synchronized movements. They had come to purify corruption and found only cooperation. Had prepared to battle darkness and encountered only pragmatism. Their certainty had been their strength, and that certainty had just been challenged at its foundation. Only Cathazun remained the herald, drifting closer to Rimuru with something approaching camaraderie. Well played, anomaly. You did not defeat them. You simply made them irrelevant. The light cannot purify what does not need purification. The Titans cannot impose order on what is already stable. And the void. We cannot corrupt what has no weakness to exploit. The herald's form began to fade, dissolving back into the shadows. The Void Lords will debate what to do about you. Some will want destruction. Others will want to simply wait and see if you destroy yourself through your own compassion. But I think we will watch. Like the fragment of AzeRoth watches. Like Odin watches. Because you are doing something unprecedented, and even beings of entropy can appreciate novelty. Cathazun disappeared entirely, leaving only a final whisper that echoed through dimensions mortals could not perceive. Prove us all wrong, little anomaly. Prove that power can be kind. Prove that strength can protect rather than dominate. Prove that in a world of cosmic conflicts, there is space for simple compassion. We are all very curious to see if you succeed. The multi-dimensional barrier dissolved, and Rimuru was left alone at Sanctuary's gate. The cosmic forces departed. The immediate threat ended. Behind the slime, the settlement was silent. 600 beings trying to process what they had just witnessed. Thornweaver approached slowly, the Quillbore Elder's expression mixing awe with something deeper. You faced 3 cosmic forces for us. Why we are nothing. We are the forgotten. You are someone, Rimuru interrupted gently, and someone is always worth protecting. That evening, as Sanctuary's residents returned to their routines, with the resilience of people who had survived worse, Rimuru sat alone at the boundary and considered what had just occurred. 3 cosmic forces had converged, and all 3 had withdrawn. Not defeated, not destroyed. Simply convinced that direct confrontation would cost more than it was worth. But the slime knew this was not over. Irel's certainty had cracked, but not shattered. Odin's observation could turn to intervention at any moment. The Void's curiosity could shift to action if their calculations changed. Sanctuary had survived. But survival was not victory. It was just the beginning of something larger, something that would test not just Rimuru's power, but the fundamental premise that compassion could exist without weakness, that helping could be an end in itself rather than a means to control. In the deep places, the fragment that had been AzeRoth watched and felt something it had not experienced in eons of existence. Pride. Not in corruption achieved or madness spread, but pride in watching something unprecedented unfold. The anomaly had stood against cosmic forces and won not through violence, but through absolute conviction that what it protected was worth protecting. The fragment laughed, and for once there was no malice in the sound. Only dark amusement at the chaos this simple entity would cause just by refusing to follow the scripts the cosmic forces had been reading for millions of years. In Sanctuary, children slept safely. Farmers planned next season's crops. Defenders stood watch, knowing that someone stood with them. And throughout it all, a blue slime held a wooden carving and remembered why power mattered only when it was used to protect those who could not protect themselves. The cosmic forces had learned something today. They had learned that Sanctuary was defended. They had learned that the anomaly would not back down. They had learned that some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. But most importantly, they had learned fear. Not fear of destruction, but fear of irrelevance. Fear that this impossible experiment might succeed, might prove that their grand designs were never necessary. That order and salvation and enlightenment could be achieved without domination and forced conversion and cosmic authority. And that fear Rimuru suspected would shape everything that came next. 3 months after the confrontation, CL completed her analysis of the reality weave. The work had been meticulous, conducted in fragments during quiet moments when Sanctuary's needs did not require immediate attention. Mapping the dimensional pathways that connected AzeRoth to other realities. Identifying the resonance patterns that would allow transit back to the world where Rimuru had been born, where Tempest waited, where companions wondered if their leader would ever return. The gate could be opened. The path home existed. All that remained was the decision to take it. Rimuru stood at Sanctuary's boundary as dawn broke over the settlement, watching the community wake to another day of ordinary miracles. Quillbore farmers heading to fields that should not exist. Knoll builders raising new structures with Trog assistance. Kobold children running through streets that had not existed 4 months ago, laughing with the unself-consciousness of those who had never known hunger. Harpy scouts taking flight from their perches, their patrols protecting a home they had never expected to find. 643 souls, now called Sanctuary Home. The number had stabilized as word spread that this was not a temporary refuge, but an actual community, one with rules and expectations, and the radical requirement that old hatreds be left at the boundary. Some who arrived decided they preferred their grievances to peace and departed. Most stayed drawn by the simple reality that cooperation provided what generations of conflict had not: safety, stability, futures for their children. Thornweaver approached the Quillbore elder, moving with a careful dignity that had become characteristic of Sanctuary's unofficial council. The settlement had developed its own governance structures in Rimuru's absence. Elders from each species gathering to resolve disputes and make collective decisions. The slime had encouraged this understanding that a community dependent on one protector was not truly free. "You are leaving," Thornweaver said, not quite a question. Rimuru did not ask how the elder knew. Thornweaver had proven perceptive about many things, reading patterns in behavior that the slime had not realized were visible. "A path home is opened. I have people waiting for me, a place where I'm needed." "You are needed here. You don't need me anymore," Rimuru corrected gently. "You have walls and wells and fields. You have defenders who know how to coordinate. You have trade agreements with goblin merchants and provisional recognition from both Alliance and Horde. Sanctuary isn't an experiment anymore. It's a community. It will survive without me." Thornweaver was silent for a long moment, gazing out over the settlement that had been built from desperation and hope in equal measure. "You taught us something we had forgotten. That survival is not just about the strong dominating the weak. That cooperation creates more than competition ever could. That someone caring makes all the difference." The elder paused, then continued with the weight of someone speaking truth that needed voicing. "We will remember. When cosmic forces return, when pressures mount, when old hatreds whisper that it would be easier to fight than to cooperate, we will remember that a blue spirit came to the wasteland and helped because help was possible." Word spread through the settlement with the speed of news that mattered. By midday, the central square had filled with residents who had come not to demand that Rimuru stay, but to bear witness to departure. They understood in the way that people who had survived impossible odds understood that holding too tightly only drove away what you wished to keep. The farewell gathering was not organized by Rimuru. The slime would have preferred quiet departure, avoiding sentiment that made leaving harder. But the residents had decided among themselves that acknowledgement mattered, that gratitude should be expressed even if it could never be repaid. They came in delegations, each species sending representatives to speak words that varied in eloquence, but shared common themes. The Quillbore brought the first harvest grain bundled and offered not as payment, but as symbol. Thornweaver presented it with simple words that carried profound weight. From dead soil came life. From despair came hope. We were forgotten, and you remembered. This harvest feeds our children. Take some portion so you remember us as we will remember you. The knoll presented a banner, woven from materials scavenged and reclaimed, depicting a blue circle surrounded by figures of different species standing together. The pack leader, a scarred warrior named Razak, who had been among the first to arrive, spoke with the blunt directness characteristic of his people. We were enemies. You made us allies. This banner flies over Sanctuary. When others see it, they will know we stand together. You taught us pack extends beyond blood. The kobold offered candles, dozens of them, crafted with surprising artistry from resources the settlement had learned to process. Their representative, a young engineer named Wick, spoke with the enthusiasm of someone describing technical achievement. You give us light when we hide in dark. Now we make own light. Candles burn, yes, but idea stays. We light own way now. The Trog could not craft words with the fluency of other species, but they brought stone carved with careful precision, a sculpture that depicted a slime form, surrounded by smaller figures. The Trog crafter simply placed it before Rimuru and grunted a single word that needed no translation. Protector, the harpy descended in formation. Windshriek landing with the grace of a predator who had learned that not all prey needed hunting. We were hunted everywhere. You gave us sky to call home. Our eggs hatch in safety. Our young learn to fly without fear. When we scout, we protect what you built. This is debt that cannot be repaid, only honored. Even the Murloc emerged from the settlement's water sources, their spokesperson gurgling in their native language, while CL provided translation. Current strong alone. Currents together become ocean. You show us ocean. Rimuru accepted each offering. Each word, feeling the weight of what had been built, not through cosmic power, but through the simple choice to help when help was needed. The wooden carving from the Quilbur child remained safe within the slime's massed treasure beyond price reminder of why any of this had mattered. As the sun began its descent casting long shadows across the settlement, Rimuru prepared the reality gate. The process was not dramatic. No great column of light or thunderous dimensional tear. Simply a folding of space, a gentle parting of the barriers between worlds, a doorway that opened onto somewhere else. The residents gathered at respectful distance, understanding that this moment belonged to departure, but wanting their presence to mark it. Children held to parents. Elders stood with quiet dignity. Warriors maintained watch even now, because Sanctuary had learned that safety required constant vigilance. Before stepping through the gate, Rimuru turned back to address the assembly one final time. When the slime spoke, the words were simple, stripped of cosmic weight, just honest truth that needed expression. I did not come to your world seeking purpose. I came by accident, pulled into conflicts I did not understand, caught between forces that saw everything as variables in their grand designs. You were dying, forgotten, by those same forces considered acceptable losses in cosmic calculations that had no space for individual lives. The slime paused, and in that pause 600 beings held collective breath. You taught me that power means nothing without purpose. That strength is wasted if not used to protect. That in a world of grand designs and cosmic conflicts, the most important thing is caring, whether people live or die. You were not variables. You were not acceptable losses. You were people who deserved a chance to survive, and when I helped you take that chance, you built something that made cosmic forces question their certainties. Rimuru looked across faces of different species, meeting eyes that held hope and determination and the resilience of those who had survived what should have killed them. Sanctuary is yours now, not mine, yours. Defend it, grow it. Let it stand as proof that cooperation works, that peace does not require domination, that strength protects rather than conquers. The cosmic forces will test you. They cannot help themselves. They will push and probe and attempt to categorize you into their frameworks. Do not let them. Stay true to what you have built here. The slime began to turn toward the gate, then stopped, one more thing needing voice. If you truly need me, if Sanctuary faces destruction, it cannot withstand call. I will hear. I will come. This is not goodbye forever. This is goodbye for now. The residents made no sound as Rimuru approached the gate. No cheers, no wails, just the profound silence of people bearing witness to moment they knew was significant, even if they could not articulate why. Thornweaver stepped forward one last time, and when the elders spoke, it was with the authority of someone speaking for all present. Go with our gratitude. Return to your people with knowledge that you changed our world. Not through conquest, not through conversion, simply by caring when no one else did. We will hold what you helped us build. This is our promise. Rimuru passed through the reality gate, and the transition was gentle, a step from one world to another, from AzeRoth's harsh sunlight to Tempest's familiar architecture. The gate closed behind with barely a whispered dimensional barriers, resealing, leaving no trace that passage had been possible. In Sanctuary, the residents remained gathered for long minutes after the gate vanished. Then slowly, they dispersed back to their routines. Fields needed tending. Walls needed maintaining. Children needed feeding. Life continued as it always did, but now, with the certainty that they were not forgotten, that someone had cared enough to help them survive, and that survival was worth the effort of cooperation. The banner the Knoll had crafted flew from Sanctuary's highest point, visible for miles across the barrens. Blue circles surrounded by united figures, symbol of something unprecedented. Proof that the forgotten could be remembered, that the weak could become strong, that in a world of cosmic conflicts, simple compassion could change everything. In Tempest, Rimuru's return was marked with celebration that the slime endured with patient amusement. Companions asked about the journey, about where the dimensional instability had led, about what had been encountered in absence. Rimuru told them about a world called AzeRoth, about cosmic forces that had never learned to care about individual lives, about people who had built community from nothing, with help that asked for nothing in return. The story would be recorded in Tempest's archives, another strange tale from their leaders' travels, interesting but distant. But Rimuru kept certain things private. The wooden carving from the Quillboar child stored carefully away. The memory of Thornweaver's words about being remembered. The knowledge that somewhere across dimensional barriers, 600 people lived in safety because someone had chosen to help. In the halls of valor. Odin continued his observations reports from distant scouts, indicating that Sanctuary not only survived but expanded slowly, carefully, always maintaining the principles its founder had established. The Prime Designate found himself grudgingly impressed. The experiment worked. Against all Titan projections, cooperation had created stability that domination had never achieved. In the spaces where light burned brightest, Irel meditated on certainty and doubt. She had witnessed salvation rejected, had seen peace achieved without forced conversion, had felt her convictions crack under the weight of simpler truth. The High Exarch was changed, though she could not yet articulate how. Some seeds took time to grow, in the deep places where void whispered and madness pooled the fragment that had been. And Zoth watched Sanctuary's continued existence and felt something that old gods were never meant to experience. Not hope exactly, but curiosity about what else might be possible. What other assumptions might be questioned, what other certainties might prove less certain than they appeared. And in the southern barrens, as night fell, and Sanctuary's walls were lit by kobold candles, and harpy sentries wheeled through darkening sky, and Quillboar families gathered for evening meals. The settlement existed as a monument to simple truth. Someone had cared, and caring had been enough. The cosmic forces would continue, their eternal conflicts would wage their wars for control of reality. Itself would debate grand designs and ultimate purposes. But in one small corner of AzeRoth, forgotten peoples had learned that survival did not require choosing sides in cosmic wars, that peace was built through cooperation rather than domination, that power's highest purpose was protection of those who could not protect themselves. They called themselves Sanctuary. And they endured. AzeRoth had been visited by an anomaly that existed outside cosmic frameworks, that refused to be categorized or contained or converted. The anomaly had helped people who needed help, had built something that should not exist, had proven that grand designs were not necessary when simple compassion was sufficient. And then the anomaly had departed, leaving behind not conquest or conversion or corruption, but simply a community that had learned cooperation was possible. In the grand scheme of cosmic conflicts spanning millions of years, Sanctuary was insignificant. One settlement in a wasteland, 600 beings of species. No one cared about a social experiment that would likely fail once the protective presence that enabled it had departed. Except it did not fail. It endured. And in enduring it raised questions that cosmic forces had spent eons avoiding. If cooperation worked here, where else might it work? If peace could be achieved without domination, what justified the domination that had always been deemed necessary? If strength could protect rather than conquer, what did that say about strength that only knew conquest? The anomaly had been in AzeRoth for 123 days, had built one settlement, had protected 600 beings, and somehow, in that brief presence and limited scope, had planted seeds of doubt in certainties that had stood for millions of years. The cosmic forces would water those seeds with their attention, their observation, their inability to simply forget what they had witnessed. And whatever grew from those seeds would reshape AzeRoth in ways none of them had predicted or planned for. But that was future's work. For now in Sanctuary, children slept safely. Farmers planned harvests. Defenders stood watch. Elders taught the young. And throughout it all, the community endured proof that someone had cared, a reminder that caring had been enough monument to the radical possibility that power could be kind. The blue spirit had departed, but what it had built remained. And what remained would change everything.